Courtney.
Thank you so much for joining us. We are the Washington Progressive Party, and we are here today to talk about election integrity and the secret ballot. Here with us today is Courtney and Tyler with Director of Fair Vote Washington, Lisa Ayrault, Executive Director of the Equal Vote Coalition, Sara Wolk, and candidate for Secretary of State, Gentry Lang. Thank you all so much for being here today. And a short word about our revolution. We are an organization challenging the power of the two-party system and prioritizing the needs of our people and our planet. With your support, we are building a national grassroots movement with local groups powerful enough to win progressive issue fights, elect progressive champions, transform our political system, and get big money out of politics. Thank you for joining us. Courtney?
You're muted, Court.
Thank you again. I'm Courtney Love, and Tyler and I will be speaking with Lisa Ayrault from the Director of Fair Vote Washington. And Lisa, could you please say hello and tell us a little bit about yourself and Fair Vote?
Hi, folks. Thanks for having me here. I'm a longtime math, high school and middle school math teacher and school administrator who in the last 2 years have been swept into this very exciting grassroots movement for electoral reform here in Washington State. Fair Vote Washington is a nonpartisan nonprofit here in Washington with about 10 chapter groups all over the state, from Spokane to Bellingham to Vancouver and everything in between. We've got supporters working hard on all kinds of issues, particularly a 2020 candidate outreach going on right now. Our long-term goal is to bring ranked choice voting to the statewide, and in the near term, we've been working on a local options bill that would allow local jurisdictions to adopt ranked choice voting.
Thank you. Tyler?
Mm-hmm.
Muted, Tyler.
Let's get to all three candidates for a brief introduction, and then we can kind of get into the more nitty-gritty about the bigger picture. Let's go straight to Sara, if that's okay, and introduce yourself and let us know what you're doing.
Thanks. Hi. Yeah, I'm Sara. I'm the Executive Director with the Equal Vote Coalition, which is dedicated to fighting for equality in the vote itself. So our current system really plays favorites in predictable and familiar ways. It's not fair. That's why we have groups like Fair Vote doing the work they do. Equal Vote is advocating for star voting, which is a different type of preferential voting method that was invented more recently. So with star voting, you score your candidates up to 5 stars on a 5-star rating type ballot. The 2 highest scoring candidates overall are finalists, and your vote goes to the finalists you preferred. So what that does for you is, even if your favorite can't win, your vote makes a difference. It finds a majority preferred winner, and you don't have to worry about voting lesser evil, strategic voting in terms of, is it safe to actually vote your conscience? With the Equal Vote Coalition, the idea really is that we should be able to vote our conscience. We should not have to worry about wasting our vote. And the candidate who best represents the will of the people should actually win. So we have a long way to go, but it is an easy fix. And we'd love to see everyone getting more involved and more educated about this. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, that's great. And then Gentry, would you introduce yourself and just let us know who you are and what you're doing?
Sure. My name's Gentry Lang. I'm running for Secretary of State. The Secretary of State is the chief voting officer in the state of Washington. And so it's probably the best place to run for voting integrity issues. One of my biggest issues is getting private companies out of our voting count process. Proprietary software that's been used now for more than a decade all around the country. Still here in Washington, people think that a vote by mail somehow circumvents the machines, but it's still fed into the computers in the end. So yeah, that's what I'm here to talk about, that and the secret ballot, of course.
Great. So let's cycle back. One of the ideas here is that anybody who's watching this should have a real thorough understanding of what we're talking about here. I'll briefly outline what we're dealing with. First past the post is our current election system. We're specifically in a top 2 primary, and it has a spoiler effect. Everybody knows that when a Green Party candidate runs, everybody's telling them you shouldn't run because you're going to get the other side elected. So it totally crushes any attempt to build something other than what's already there, and basically is antithetical to any kind of diversity within the voting spectrum, hence the 2-party system. So in a moment here, let's go back to Lisa. And Lisa, if you could give us your pitch about what RCV is, ranked choice voting, what is an alternative to first past the post voting. I'd love you to just give us your big, your medium-sized pitch for what exactly this is, so that people can really dig into the understanding of what this system looks like and how it works.
Sure. Thanks, Tyler. Ranked choice voting is just as simple as it sounds, a very simple change to the way we vote. Instead of limiting you to making just one choice when you vote, you get to rank your choices, as many as you like. First choice, second choice, third choice, and so on. That way, if your first choice doesn't have enough support to win, your vote can still count for your backup choice, your next choice. We're used to ranking our choices all the time when we make decisions in life. I went to the grocery store this morning. I was looking for some, my favorite kind of apple, the Kanzi apple I've just found, and they were out. So I went for my second choice instead. So it's intuitive. We do it all the time. Benefits of voting this way are substantial. Some of the top ones that we find here in Washington. First, just voters intuitively understand that they have more voice and more say in an election when they have an opportunity to rank their choices instead of just being limited to one. Another that we're finding in the 20 or so jurisdictions around the country that are using ranked choice already, that have been using it for over more than a decade at this point. We have a lot of data that's supporting the outcome that we're seeing more women and people of color both running and winning in ranked choice elections. I have a lot of data about that if people are interested in more details, but that's the high level view, and it's really working. We're also seeing much more positive campaigns, more issues focused civil campaigning, as candidates realize that it's not sufficient to just focus their message on their narrow base of first choice supporters. They actually want to talk to all the voters because they want to get second and third choice support from voters who will be voting for other candidates in first place. So they don't want to alienate those voters. So the best strategy to win a ranked choice election from a candidate's perspective is to stay focused on the issues, stay civil, and speak to all voters. So those are also another, I'll add just one more benefit of ranked choice that we're seeing is it does mitigate the role of money. We're seeing more candidates winning elections who are not necessarily the best funded campaigns. So that's also an encouraging result. And part of the reason that comes is that you don't need to have primary elections when you use a ranked choice. You can you can eliminate low turnout primaries, have all the voters show up for a single high turnout election where all voices matter.
Great. Thank you so much for your work.
Sure.
So, and then next, let's go move on to Sara and give us, I want an in-depth explanation here. I want everybody, myself included, to be able to understand exactly how star voting works, and you can include how it differs from RCV if you like, so that we have a real good idea of what you guys are pitching as the alternative to first past the post. Sara? Muted now. Sara, can you unmute?
Oh yeah, sorry. So as I was saying earlier, ranked choice voting and star voting movements really have the same goals. We're in consensus that our current system really is the bottom of the barrel, and the science is pretty unanimous on that. In terms of representative outcomes, we can do better. So both star voting and ranked choice voting offer a preferential style ballot where you can show who you prefer to who your first choice is, who your second choice is. Both star voting and ranked choice voting, I think, help with polarization, help lead to more diverse outcomes, help make underdog or third-party candidates feel like they can run without or with less fear of being a spoiler. And if you want to, before I go into more depth on comparing the two, those are the things we have in common. And star voting and ranked choice can both be used for single winner elections, for multi-winner elections, or proportional representation elections, which I think we'll get more into proportional later. But if you want to cut to the first slide I had that just explains how star voting works, I'll go into that.
Which,
And that was-
what's,
I'm
what's the
sorry, I'm not sure. I have a voter satisfaction efficiency chart and election accuracy by voting method chart. We might not have gotten it in.
Oh, okay. Well, in any case, I'll explain it. So with star voting, you've got a 5-star ballot. You can give scores anywhere from 0 for no support all the way up to 5 stars for full support. And then for candidates who are pretty good, but they're not your favorite, 4 stars, 3 stars. If somebody's better than your worst case scenario, but you really wouldn't support them unless it came down to it, with star voting, you can give them 1 star. So that's a big difference right there. I think we're all very familiar with ranking candidates. We're very familiar with rating things like the 5-star rating. And if you want to just take down the slides for this, because I'm not talking about any of that right now. But yeah, so with star voting, the ballot is very simple. It's just a 5-star ballot. Everyone's familiar with it. But 5-star ratings allow us to show not just preference order, but level of support. How much or how little do I like these candidates? And that is information that can be relevant, especially when we have races with 3 candidates, 4 candidates, 5 candidates, 25 candidates, like we had, I think, a recent Washington and Oregon election with candidates up in the 20s. So with our current system, as Tyler explained, there's a real flaw called the spoiler effect. And that means that the more candidates you have on your side, the more of a disadvantage you're at as a voter. And that has very real consequences. We see politicos kind of primarying their own races, saying, you know, we shouldn't both run because we'll split the vote. So it really hurts voter choice. And star voting really goes a long way to not just address this, not just band-aid it, but to actually solve that problem. So with star voting, it eliminates the spoiler effect 100% completely. It ensures that no data is wasted. All data on the ballot is counted, and really produces much more representative results because of that. So if you do want to go to that chart with the ranked choice and star voting side by side, I can speak to that a little. Thank you. Yeah, so one of the things with ranked choice voting is it was invented about 100 years ago, 150 years ago. And it was invented kind of as a workaround to help tabulate a ranked ballot in a way that was less complex. But in order to make it less complex, the way that ranked choice voting is done is you count just the first choice votes and eliminate the person in last choice, in last place. And that sounds really great, but in practice, it can do a couple of things. You can ignore second place and third place rankings that actually were really relevant if you have a candidate who was really broadly supported. And it can lead to non-representative outcomes because of that. So star voting was really invented to address a lot of the criticisms of ranked choice voting, also a few in terms of implementation, election integrity, election security. Star voting offers a number of advantages. And yeah, so here in Oregon, it's really been leading the conversation for the last 4 or 5 years, and it's really getting national and international attention as well. really topping the charts in terms of solving these problems once and for all.
Great. Thank you for your work.
Yeah,
I'd like to go to Gentry next. Now, Gentry, I know that your take on this is that we have to solve a bunch of other stuff before we're ever going to get to things like alternative voting styles. But I want to hear from you directly about the big picture on election integrity. And I know that you're all about open source software, and I know that you're a proponent of proportional representation. But from a person who has studied election integrity for however long it is, I know it's a long time. Can you tell me, how are we going to do this? How are obviously I'd like to see you get elected to make some changes, but I also understand that the Secretary of State position, if I understand correctly, is not where you would pass RCV or star voting. You would actually do that in the legislature. So I know this is kind of a big, complex ball of wax, but I'd just like you to speak to the whole ball of wax, if you would, as a person who's running to make change in probably the most significant election integrity seat in the state of Washington.
Well, I think you're right. Thanks for having me. The reality is running for office is probably a really good place for people to start if they have some background in the issues. I think a whole host of people running for county auditor would be a great place to get going. The reality is that it is more of a bully pulpit position than a legislative position, so you're right about that. But I would like to use it largely to talk about things that are not being talked about. A lot of people think that I'm fairly anti-vote by mail, which I kind of am, but I'm more interested in the overall goal of how do you create public ownership and public control of the system. And there's two things that happened with our switch to vote by mail, which people don't talk about. One is it undermined the secret ballot, and two is it closed the poll sites. And they kind of go hand in hand. When you close the poll sites, you undermine the secret ballot. And so we went from somewhere around 2,500 sites to about 1+ per county. So we went to 2,500 basically to 1 that you can use in your whole county. So a lot of these things go hand in hand, but I think where it comes back, the whole ball of wax comes back, is where is your public ownership and control, and where is it being taken away from you? Your control is being taken away from you, both physically when you shut down the polls, as well as electronically when you allow private corporations to count the votes and hide behind trade secrecy to do it.
Yeah. So, okay, now, and again, I'm going to, it's a little bit popcorn. It's such a big topic, but I want to go back to this concept of proportional representation. One of the, in my estimation, one of the magic bullets, and I think we'll go to Lisa next on this, because I understand that the goal here is to solve some real serious problems, like, the fact that arguably most of the country feels unrepresented in their government is, in my estimation, is the real root of the problem. And proportional representation, which we had once, solves that, because even if you're the minority, you still have a voice, and that's a really, really, really big deal. So I know that I've heard Lisa say that the end goal is actually proportional representation. Correct me if I'm wrong, well, that's my understanding anyway. And I'd like you to fill us in on how, the implications of that on the big picture, and how we would get there using your chosen system.
Thank you, Tyler. Really appreciate it. If you don't mind, I want to just quickly say a couple things, because Sara had some things to say about ranked choice voting, which were not all true. So I want to just quickly add that how wonderful it is to have so many people interested in electoral reform. It's terrific. And we're very excited to see STAR just recently developed. It's about 6 years old, I think. And ranked choice voting has been used for more than 100 years. So again, we've got a lot of data that's demonstrating results from ranked choice elections, and we're very excited to see STAR. We think the next thing is to use it in a town or two so that we can begin to get some data. It is at this point hypothetical, the results, and it'd be great to see if the claims that the proponents of STAR are making can really hold up when it's used in public elections. I also want to just point out that I'm 100% with Sarah that we're all on the same team and agreeing that the current method that we use, single winner, winner take all, choose one, first past the post, there are a lot of names we use for it. There's broad agreement that it's the worst possible way that we could be voting. Spoiler effect and other reasons, so we do need to displace that. And our view is that the priority is to displace that method. And it's wonderful to continue to develop more new, better, perhaps ways of voting, and we're eager to see those results. So with respect to proportional, did I also say that there's no perfect voting method, right? Every single one has their weaknesses. So that's also important to acknowledge. So proportional representation is just a really simple idea. I love the quote that I forgot the name of the fellow who said it back in France about 100 years ago, and his name is escaping me at the moment. But simple idea: the right to decision rests with the majority, but the right to representation belongs to all of us. So right now, the way we choose, for example, in a typical city in Washington State, city council members, let's say, with each city council member elected in a separate single winner race, where if you have 50% of the votes in the city, you can elect the person who's running for position number one. Similarly, the same 51% of the voters can choose the person who's running for position number two, and on down the line, with the result that 51% of the voters can choose every seat, can have all the representation. So 51% of the vote in our system can lead to 100% of the seats, which, as we see, leaves out a whole lot of people. So if you're part of a group, let's say it's a political group, or a racial ethnic group, or an issues focused group, if you've got 40% of the vote, let's say, in your town or in your county, it gets you no representation right now on the council. So a simple change to using a ranked ballot, same ranked choice process that I described earlier, ranked choice voting can yield, when it's used in its multi-winner form, will have the result that if 40% of the voters has a certain preferred candidate, then, or a certain preferred set of candidates, then they can achieve that representation, about 40% of the seats on the body. So that's the simple idea behind proportional representation. So given that there will continue to be single winner races, mayor, governor, auditor, all kinds of races where we're choosing a single winner, we need single winner ranked choice voting for those. And again, with the very same ballot for the voter doesn't experience any difference between a ranked ballot that's choosing a single winner or a ranked ballot that's going to choose multiple winners for a city council or a body, an elected body, port commission, county council, could be the state legislature also. And again, that simple idea of using a ranked ballot will result in proportional outcomes for those elected bodies. So if your group has 30% of the vote, you'll get 30% of the seats. If your group has 60% of the vote, you should have a majority of the seats, but not all of them. You'll get about 60% of the seats, proportional to the share of the electorate. That's a simple idea.
Awesome. So within, to give a real world example, in Washington State, many people on the right feel like they have no voice because, the whole legislature is dominated by the left, by the Democrats. And many of us believe that there should be a seat at the table for everybody, from the libertarians, the Greens, the progressives, and the Democrats and the Republicans, and this is what we're moving towards. So in a moment we'll go to Sara next, and if there's any responses that's appropriate, I'd be curious to know how star voting would figure into proportional representation, and I'd also like to talk about the top two, because I know you're in Oregon where the top two exists, and I think I'm not sure if I'm putting too many questions in one, but I'd like to talk about with all of you, and we'll open up the floor here in a moment. About about what the world would look like if we actually beat the top two. But first, Sarah, I'll give you a chance to respond and just tell us about proportional representation as it relates to star voting.
Sure. Yeah. And Lisa, you explained it really well. The basic idea is that if you have a quarter of the voters, you should have a quarter of the seats on a council. And obviously, that's a really great goal. That's the type of thing that brings great ideas to the table. And for star voting, it really works pretty much the same as for ranked choice voting in terms of the voter perspective. You use the same ballot, it's just counted differently. And that's where proportional representation becomes like a very in-depth topic, probably more in-depth than we want to cover here. But basically, the votes, either with ranked choice voting or with star voting, are counted using an algorithm that really kind of reweights or transfers people's votes around depending on if they've already gotten somebody elected or if they haven't been represented yet. So with star voting, it kind of follows almost like philosophy as if you were hiring somebody for the job, and each of us in this conversation had, say, $10 to put in on hiring the person or the couple of people. So if I've already gotten somebody elected to the first seat, then I've already spent some of my vote. If I'm not represented yet, then I haven't spent any of my vote. So the Equal Vote Coalition convened a committee a couple of years back to do a really in-depth study of proportional representation, because it's done differently all around the world. A lot of places do it by political party, which kind of guarantees almost a quota of representation party-wise. But that has some drawbacks and really isn't being proposed in the United States because it increases partisanship. And I think a lot of us can say right now, the two-party system in America is very toxic and increasing polarization. Even if we do increase the spectrum of polarization, that's not the direction we want to go. So the type of proportional that star voting or ranked choice voting is putting forward is not based on party. It's more based on ideology or faction. So it's kind of up to the voters to determine who they want to vote for and what type of representation that looks like. So, and there's a lot of different details, and those details are very, very important. So proportional representation done wrong can help extremist, hateful factions get representation and then use that platform to rise to power. That's happened throughout history around the world. If you set the thresholds high enough so that, you can't just win with 5% of the vote or 10%, you need 25% or 35% to win. You can kind of rule out extremist minority groups, but that also might rule out minorities that you really want to have included. And so it does become a complicated thing that deserves deep study. And the devil's in the details.
Yeah. Good. Thank you. So I want to keep it more open now. So I want to invite people to just jump in if you feel it. Right now, as everybody in the room has stated, we have the worst possible system, not just in first past the post, but the top two primary is just, it's not doing what it's supposed to do. And it was actually, the background of the top two is that it was we the people that did it. It was an initiative. We gathered the signatures and passed that through. It was not the legislature. And the way these things work, as I understand it, and I'm no expert, is that if such an initiative doesn't do what it was intended to do, then it can be overturned. And I did the data myself last year, and the intention of the top two was to create more diversity, to allow third parties to have a chance, and to make a situation to correct the problems that everybody knew existed. The two-party system has been known to be toxic for a long, long, long time. And since then, it has never been the case that, except for by defaults, a non-mainstream candidate has gotten through. It's never happened. And I don't know, I didn't actually do it last year. I didn't check it last year to see if anybody has solved it, but that is grounds to change it. My understanding is that would then revert back to what we had before, which I believe is the Montana primary, where everybody sends one person from their primary, every party, and of course then we get a spoiler effect. So I just want to open the floor and ask people, how do we fix this? Let's say I did it and I raised the money to hire a lawyer to beat the top two, and we did overturn it, which we probably could right now. How do we then have it not be chaos and have it move forward in a positive way? What's it going to take?
Yeah.
Anybody?
Just briefly on that. So Oregon uses top two for most of its local races in a lot of the bigger counties. Washington uses it statewide and mandates it. So Washington has a law about that all elections need to be done with a general primary or a primary and then a top two general election. And that means that legally ranked choice voting is illegal. You can't change the system to ranked choice voting without repealing that law first. And so I think in terms of a tactical move for the movement, I know Fair Vote has been working on that for years. That's something that we've offered to coalition on, is taking down that top two mandate and actually legalizing preferential voting systems. So again, like you said, the top two exists because our current choose one only voting method is only accurate with two candidates in the race. With more than two candidates, you end up with vote splitting, spoilers, and non-representative outcomes. Ranked choice voting really does mitigate that, particularly if the third or fourth candidate is non-viable. But if there's a viable third candidate or fourth candidate or multi-candidate election, that's where you can still have spoilers with ranked choice voting. And that's the big reason why star voting was invented.
That's probably the big place where Sara and I disagree. And again, we don't have time to really go into the details of that distinction in this time. But again, just to say, it'll be great to see star actually get a chance to get tried in a town somewhere, just even one public election, to get some data so we can see if the claims that the star proponents are making. So for the moment, what we are seeing is that ranked choice voting is solving the spoiler effect, absolutely is solving it in hundreds of ranked choice elections that have happened in the last 15, 20 years in this country. Something like 20 jurisdictions that are using it. So it absolutely, Tyler, is allowing there to be a large field of candidates. So voters have plenty of choices. And then out of that large field comes the candidate supported by the majority of the voters. So we don't need to winnow the field to the top two in order to ensure a majority winner like we do right now in Washington. And the local options bill that we have worked on for two sessions in the legislature, we're coming up on the third, is definitely getting support. We're encouraged at the prospect of passing that. We're also planning for a statewide ballot initiative, laying plans for that. So if folks are interested in adding your voice to this movement that is growing quickly in Washington state to bring ranked choice voting to our elections, we'd love to have you sign up at fairvotewa.org, our website, and get involved because we think we can pass this bill, and we know that we have the support on the ground for statewide ballot initiative in about a year. We're looking to launch that.
Okay.
Can I jump in as a candidate that's done both primary systems?
Yes,
Absolutely.
and I would like to add that there was a question about election integrity in the chat. So would you go in a little more about election integrity as well?
Sure. So I've been a third-party candidate under both systems, under the Montana system in 2005 and now under the top two system. And I would say that previously when you ran third-party, I ran for the Greens, you had a lot more wedge to get into the system and make people address the issues that people wanted to address. Under the top two system, what is happening is the Republicans and Democrats just have it locked down. And they can ignore you through the primary, and then it happens in August and it's all over. before really third-party candidates traditionally have gotten started. Most third-party candidates don't run for 2 years. They run at filing week, and then they, get moving. But this system really eliminates the third-party voice. I'd say much more than previously. As far as election integrity, I don't know what the exact question was, but I've been working on election integrity issues for about 16 years. And I first got involved because of the black box voting issue and debold election systems and the touchscreen voting machine issues. And I ran Andy Stevenson's campaign, formerly for a Democratic campaign in 2004. And we spent a lot of time uncovering all the problems with the voting machines and the software, and working with Bev Harris, who wrote Black Box Voting, and uncovering all the problems with the software. When Andy died in 2005, his last vote was a vote by mail ballot, and it got rejected upon signature. And so I started looking into the problems with vote by mail because everybody else had done other work on the election integrity side. And so I've spent a long time looking at just the inherent problems of vote by mail. And lately I've come to propose a walk-in drop-off absentee system over something like a vote by mail system. We probably don't have time to get into all the election integrity issues, but largely what I try to do is think about things as what is public ownership of the system and of the counting, and how does the current system need to be improved to improve that public ownership and control.
Okay, thank you. Maddie and or Courtney, you guys have anything more you want to jump in with? I have tons of questions and I'll just keep on going, but I want to make sure there's space for other people to have the floor too.
I do actually have one question for Gentry Lang. So vote by mail historically has increased voter turnout, especially in rural areas, because polling stations in rural areas tend to be farther from people's homes. So how would you address the issue of voter turnout if we're turning away from vote by mail?
Well, thanks for the question. First, I wouldn't, I'm trying to draw a distinction between something of a vote by mail system as well as an absentee system. So I'm not totally against an absentee system. Second, we have vote by mail in Washington. It's not going to change for this election. So this is a theoretical conversation right now about election integrity. And for your exact question, I don't know that turnout is worth sacrificing accuracy and having your vote counted honestly. And that's something we should look at, because before you even get into stuff like what happened in North Carolina this year, where one person decided to rig the whole election with absentee ballots, before you get into the nefarious stuff, there is all sorts of accuracy problems within the system itself. For instance, Greg Palast just wrote an article recently showing that Washington, Oregon, and Colorado, the predominantly vote by mail states, are throwing out the most votes in the nation. So there is a problem there, and it kind of needs to be addressed. And then underlying everything is a secret ballot issue, which when you move to a vote by mail system, you no longer really have a secret ballot system. Originally, the Australian ballot was created and it used a poll site to make sure nobody was looking over your shoulder. And when you go to a vote by mail system, you enable everything from vote selling to voter influence. And so I believe we can get a lot of what people like, the convenience, the increased turnout, through a robust poll and drop-off absentee system. You'll see drop boxes all over King County, without sacrificing things like accuracy and security of the system. Does that answer your question, I hope? At least to some degree.
Yeah.
I
I'd love to respond to that.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, if I can respond to that, being from Oregon, I've grown up with vote by mail. I think it offers a lot in terms of, like you said, accessibility, increased voter turnout, and increased voter education for the voter to be able to do their homework, to sit down with their computer and say, wow, I want to look up this person's record on, police accountability or the environment or whatever. I can sit down, watch some YouTube videos, and really make educated decisions. And you just can't do that the same way when you're voting in person at an electronic thing that's hackable. So I do want to validate what Gentry is saying about these concerns. And I do think that there are ways to mitigate those concerns without throwing the baby out with the bathwater. So, for example, he's talking about a black box. Voting machines should be, first off, a voting machine is what you use to vote in a state that doesn't have vote by mail. A vote tabulator is what we use in states like Washington and Oregon. And those should absolutely be open source. They should be not connected to the internet. There's a whole bunch of election integrity protocols that are best practices that should be independently verified on a level that they're currently not. We also should have protocols in practice, not just in theory, for risk limiting audits. So a risk limiting audit actually takes a percentage of the vote, hand counts it essentially, or retabulates it and says, did these results match in the sample size? If not, we do a bigger sample size. If not, we do a bigger sample size. And star voting is uniquely compatible with that in a way that ranked choice voting isn't. With ranked choice voting, because you have to count all of the first place votes before you determine which second and third choice votes are relevant, you're not able to do a local ballot count or a local subset of a ballot count. So there are kind of workarounds to that, but in my opinion, not ones that don't sacrifice some election integrity and chain of custody in the process.
I think it's wonderful that star voting has such a passionate advocate in you, Sara, and I look forward to the results that come when you begin to get some actual data on its use, and the need to centralize the count for ranked choice voting has been easily solved by more than 20 jurisdictions that are using it around the country. I did, if I could, just for a quick moment, Tyler, I wanted to highlight a pretty exciting situation here in Washington State around proportional representation and ranked choice voting, and that's unfolding right now in Yakima County, where there has been the first ever invoking of the brand new Washington Voting Rights Act in a challenge letter this last January that was sent to the Yakima County Council on behalf of One America and the Campaign Legal Center and plaintiffs in the county. And we're awaiting the results of this period of time where there's essentially negotiations happening. In another month or so, we'll know whether the county is going to accept the recommendation that they switch to ranked choice voting, proportional multi-winner ranked choice voting to improve the representation, because the issue there is that while just under 50% of the voters in Yakima County are Latinx, so it's about 49%, something like that. They've over the entire history, there's only been one ever candidate from the Latinx community who is the choice of the community who's been elected to the council. So we do see racially polarized voting in that county, and this proposed reform would essentially ensure that those voters can elect a candidate of their choosing. So it's quite an exciting thing to be watching, and we'll know within the next month or so where that's going to go.
I'm looking forward to that.
Like to,
go ahead. Sara had a response to the data thing that we should get to, but go ahead.
Okay, go ahead.
So just super briefly, star voting is new, but it has been used a lot in the number of years that it's been around. Just recently, the Independent Party of Oregon ran its full statewide election using star voting, and we have the results from that. So we do have some hard data for the first time. The Democratic Party of Oregon is currently using it for the presidential delegate elections. And so there's there is real data, real implementation. And I think that data does refute some of the concerns that people had about, change is scary. Should we be first? That's really the big criticism that we hear.
Courtney, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, the data is brand new, and we're all excited to see it. And it was just this last month that the Oregon Independent Party used it, and that was really the first time. And that again is not a public election yet. So again, we need a city or a town to try it out so that we can really begin to learn if it's able to live up to its claims.
Yeah, and I do second the need for empirical data on voter behavior, but we do have a lot of data showing that people want to be honest. They want to be able to vote their conscience. They want that power. And we have a lot of data on the 5-star rating. The 5-star ballot has been used worldwide more than any other type of polling tool.
Yeah.
Another thing that we have is if I wanted to build a skyscraper, I wouldn't build it like in ancient Italy where they built the Duomo and then they worked for a generation and then it falls in and then they try again and they're like, oh, let's try the design number 2 and it falls in, and then trial and error, they get it right. This is the modern era. We have modern science, and the science on voting reform shows that solving the spoiler effect is doable. And by that, I mean vote splitting specifically, including the center squeeze vote splitting that ranked choice has. So a lot of this is just mathematically testable. It's math.
Could I jump in 1 sec?
Yes. And then I have a follow-up for you.
Sure. The computerized voting in vote by mail goes on behind the scenes. It is through the tabulator system, but they're still the same companies, the same basic companies that got involved in computerized voting that we documented throughout the early 2000s and were part of the Hacking Democracy HBO film. And so the reality is Diebold became Dominion Systems, and in Washington State, we currently have 4 private companies that control the voting system, the voting machines. And what vote by mail does, instead of a robust absentee system, I think that could get the same effects without sending it through the mail. What vote by mail does is it shuts down the polling places. And what I find troublesome is that people haven't thought about what we are advocating for the country at large at this point. We went from 2,500 polling places down to less than 60. And what we're seeing throughout the country, not here in Washington and not perhaps Oregon, is we are seeing elections that are being rigged consistently with absentee ballots. You saw it in North Carolina last year. You've seen it in Miami-Dade County famously. You've seen it in Texas. You've seen it all over. And just because people don't talk about it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And one of the things I would draw back upon during this conversation is the conversation about voting at the kitchen table. Voting at the kitchen table is fundamentally not a secret ballot. A secret ballot gets done in a poll booth. You might like it. It might be convenient. In fact, people do seem to really enjoy voting by mail, but I don't think anybody discusses the problems with vote by mail. And the major problem right off the bat is it is not a secret ballot. And the secret ballot is one of those things that is guaranteed at this point by international human rights law. And if you look at the article on Human Rights Convention, Article 21, Article 23, you will see that when you get to a vote by mail, you're undermining a secret ballot, and now you're even breaking international law at this point by undermining a secret ballot. But I find it very funny that nobody, even in knowledgeable discussions such as this, have even asked themselves the question, what are we doing to the secret ballot at this point?
Courtney, you had a follow-up?
Well, I want to integrate what I was going to ask earlier with some of this year in Washington, we had a party declaration on the outside of our primary ballot. And I think over 70,000 ballots were discarded because of that people didn't want to mark that ballot. I see that as a privacy violation as well. And then, do you have a willingness to, so Washington has vote by mail, but right now we're looking at a national issue where there aren't vote by mail and the absentee ballots aren't as readily available. In this time of concern for pandemic illness, how do you think the national discussion, what would the national plan be to ensure health and voting? What if Trump said, how would you do it? How would you do it?
In terms of the national conversation, I think that instead of having a conversation about pushing to vote by mail, which is both physically and legislatively not going to happen by November, I would be telling people, one, wear masks, set up the amount of time you need to vote. I would not be at this point trying to frighten people from voting. I think that's been the overarching message at this point, is to frighten people of voting in fall, in November. And I think that it will depress turnout. I'm on the outside on that. I'm not telling people not to vote by mail in Washington. If anything, for election integrity, I would suggest using the drop boxes. I prefer that over the mail system. But on the national topic, I support early voting centers and drop-off walk-in absentees. At this point with the pandemic, the reality is, if we wanted to solve problems for this November, we would have needed to be doing it last year and the previous year and the previous year. This November is kind of locked in legislatively. And what I see even in Wisconsin that went on is this push to vote by mail gets just a lot of votes set aside then. And because the law is not actually on the side of executive power on the behalf of the governors to change how your voting system is done, suddenly in a pandemic, that's not their power to do. And so they say, okay, we're going to do all of this stuff, and then the Republicans fight it, and then later on you'll see that the votes largely get set aside, and whether or not they're counted later on gets pushed into the courts. And we all know that chaos has not been real friendly to the cause of voting integrity.
Okay, so we got to close up. Thank you, Gentry. I guess, can we get a 1-minute outro? Just, it's okay to repeat yourself. Who are you? Where can people find you? And then Maddie, if you could take us home, that'd be great.
And remember to mention your upcoming events.
Yeah, Lisa, please first.
Great. Lisa Ayrault, Fair Vote Washington. You can find us at our website, fairvotewa.org. We do have a project happening right now, 2020 candidates reaching out all over the state to the almost 900 people who are running for office right now in Washington state. Our volunteers are contacting those candidates to encourage them to fill out a questionnaire about their support for ranked choice voting, and we have workshops we're offering to candidates so they can learn. I just want to underscore that our current winner-take-all method of voting, our current choose-one voting method, is a big problem, needs to be replaced, is absolutely driving the political dysfunction we're seeing in our country right now, and the polarization, the lack of competitiveness in elections, the wasted votes that voters experience, and so on. So it's really imperative that we replace that method of voting with a better method. Ranked choice voting is the only method that's been used in public elections with a track record of experience. Let's get on board. Let's bring ranked choice voting to Washington, and we can continue to improve our democracy, which we know has always been a work in progress, by continuing to look for more and better ways of voting down the road. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for joining us, Lisa. Sarah, would you go next, please?
Yeah, Lisa, and thank you for all your work. I definitely want to second what you said and really uplift the voice of people that have been working on this issue for decades. Star voting is the newer option on the block, and we really feel that it goes further in terms of offering equality in the vote so that the voting system doesn't play favorites, doesn't advantage some types of voters over others. It goes further in eliminating vote splitting and the spoiler effect. And it goes further in just electing representative outcomes. So the candidate or candidates that best represent the people. Star voting, you score your candidates up to 5 stars. The 2 highest scoring candidates are finalists, and your vote goes to the finalist you preferred. So whether or not your favorite can win, your vote makes a difference. So again, I'm Sara from the Equal Vote Coalition, working all around the country nationally to bring star voting and more equitable voting to the people. You can get involved and learn more at starvoting.us and check out our events at starvotingus.us/events. So one that we have coming up is a roundtable on equitable voting in terms of eliminating implicit bias. So look forward to seeing you all get involved in this, and look forward to coalition and continuing the conversation with Fair Vote as well. Good to meet you.
Thanks for joining us. I really appreciate your time. Gentry?
Hi, thanks for talking to me. I learned a lot. I really like both. I kind of like all the different voting systems that people propose. At some point, I would like to see how they all function, on a large scale. So I've learned a lot about star voting this conversation, and I enjoyed it thoroughly. My big thing is talking about public ownership of elections, public ownership of the software and the system at large. You can find out more about me at gentry4sos.com. And thanks. This was a great discussion. I am excited to talk to voting activists. I often feel like we're all alone.
Awesome. Maddie, you want to take us home?
Absolutely. And thanks again to our guests, Lisa Ayrault, Sara Wolk, and Gentry Lang. And for those watching, thank you for sticking around. In the description below the video, you will find donation links to Uphill Media to keep the lights on, and to Our Revolution Washington to help push the progressive movement forward locally. And thank you again for being here with us today. Like, share, comment, tell us what you think about voter integrity and election integrity. And let's get the conversation going. Amber, anything else?
Oh, I think Amber had to go. I think we're clear.
Perfect.
Cool.
Well, I want to
Thanks,
add
everybody.
thank you so much to our hosts and to Uphill Media for putting this all together, for organizing this great discussion, and for giving a platform for this critical issue in this critical time in history.
Thank you all.
Thanks so much.